Welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha, a podcast shared by David Roylance. This podcast is dedicated to guiding you to completely eliminate the discontent mind and the suffering it causes by attaining enlightenment. Learn and practice the teachings of Gotama Buddha that will guide you to fully attain a peaceful, calm, serene, and content mind with joy. To support this podcast, visit patreon.com/support Buddha or visit buddhadailywisdom.com, where you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online learning resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Now, here's our teacher to share more.
Sawadee Kap. Hello and welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. Today is our Pali Canon and English study group, and we're in Volume 3 of our book series, The Words of the Buddha, The Path to Enlightenment, Revealing the Hidden. We're going to be exploring chapters 101 to 110 today. And these are where we have students that are volunteering to read the chapter. Then I will share some teachings on that chapter, and then I will open up to any and all questions that you like to ask. You can ask questions by putting that into Facebook, YouTube, or in Zoom, and you can put that in the comment section. I'll be able to see it. Or if you're in Zoom, you can electronically raise your hand and ask any and all questions that you like. This is more of a study group, where our other programs is more of a teacher-led discussion where I'm guiding you and understanding the teachings and then opening up to questions. But this particular program, we're just diving in to study the words of the Buddha. And you can get access to these books by going to buddhadailywisdom.com, and you can download them there for free. You can take it and go print it. You can get printed versions on Amazon if your country has access to that. Or here in Chiang Mai, we have versions at the temple that you can just reimburse us for the printing cost. So if there's someone in Zoom who would like to volunteer to read this first chapter, you're more than welcome, and then we can proceed in our class from there. Okay, it looks like Samantha's volunteering. Go ahead, ma'am.
Discontentedness is dependently arisen. Good, Ananda. Anyone answering rightly would answer just as Sariputta has done. I have said, Ananda, that discontentedness is dependently arisen. Dependent on what? Dependent on contact. If one were to speak thus, one would be stating what has been said by me and would not misrepresent me with what is contrary to the truth. One would explain in accordance with the teachings, and no reasonable consequence of one's assertion would give round for criticism. Therein, Ananda, in the case of those ascetics and Brahmins, advocates of dhamma, who maintain that discontentedness is created by oneself, that is conditioned by contact. Also in the case of those ascetics and Brahmins, advocates of dhamma, who maintain that discontentedness is created by another, that too is conditioned by contact. Also, in the case of those ascetics and Brahmins, advocates of dhamma, who maintain that discontentedness is created both by oneself and by one another, that too is conditioned by contact. Also, in the case of those ascetics and Brahmins, advocates of dhamma, who maintain that discontentedness has arisen randomly, being created neither by oneself nor by another, that too is conditioned by contact.
Okay, thank you, Samantha. So here, this chapter, in order to understand it, you need to have an understanding of the Four Noble Truths first, to understand that the cause of discontentedness is craving, desire, attachment, the mind longing, yearning, wanting things to be a certain way. And if the mind gets what it wants, it gets those pleasant feelings, and if it doesn't get what it wants, it gets the painful feelings. Then you need to have an understanding of the 6 sense bases, the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, the body, and the mind itself, because you'll understand that the fetter of sensual desire, which is the craving, desire, attachment, it's the mind longing, yearning through the sense bases, wanting things to be permanently pleasing. And when it gets agreeable contact, it gets those pleasant feelings. And when it gets disagreeable contact, it gets painful feelings. So here the Buddha is saying that in order for you to become discontent, there needs to be contact through one of the 6 sense bases. And sometimes it's more than one. And that's where there can be more cravings triggered and your emotions can actually be a lot stronger. So the Buddha is explaining to you here that there needs to be contact through one of these six sense bases in order for there to be discontentedness, because that's how the mind interacts with the world. It takes in any kind of information or any kind of things that it's experiencing through contact. And it's now that contact that comes in through the six sense bases that the mind, based in its craving, sees it as either agreeable or sees it as disagreeable. And when the contact is agreeable, that's where pleasant feelings arise. Or when it's disagreeable, based on the craving, that's where the painful feelings or the neither painful nor pleasant feelings arise. And what you would like to get to is that you don't see it as agreeable or disagreeable contact, that it's just contact. So that example that I typically use where you're at the stoplight and the car's playing music and it's music that you like, instead of like, oh yeah, man, let's go, let's party it up, and you just get so excited. Instead, it's like, all right, sweet, nice music, yeah, all right. But you don't allow the mind to experience conditioned pleasant feelings. And now when you go to the next light and you hear that music that isn't necessarily the music that you would usually listen to, it's like, all right, well, hey, that's music that person enjoys, and that's all that really matters. Like, hey, this is just an impermanent situation. You don't have to see it as disagreeable. You can just see it as a sound that's going into the ears, and it's neither agreeable nor disagreeable. It's just a sound, and it's impermanent, and it's going to be gone soon. So you would like to train your mind to not have craving for things to be one way or another. Where this discourse comes into being useful for you is a couple of things. Is that whenever you have discontentedness, you can narrow it down to a particular doorway. These six sense bases are considered doorways. This is the doorways to discontentedness. So it can either be one or more doorways that you're having contact come through. And you can narrow it down to that level of detail. So if you guys remember the coffee story that I told you guys, when I'm walking down the street and I smelled the coffee and it pulled me into the coffee shop. Well, in the moment when I was on the street, I didn't know what was happening necessarily. Even when I was in the store and I was ordering my coffee, I was just too caught up in my craving. But afterwards, when I realized what had happened and I needed to extinguish this, I tried to discern and figure out what was the doorway. It was the nose. So now that shaped my practice and my decisions, that when I started seeing coffee shops, I would switch to the other side of the street. And now I could know that my nose wasn't getting that odor. And now I can smell coffee and there's no craving in the mind. So I'm not interested to drink any coffee whatsoever. But during that sensitive period of time where I was letting go of this craving, I needed to train the mind through ensuring that I wasn't receiving contact through the nose with the coffee. So this is one way that you can use a discourse like this. If you understand that discontentedness is dependent on contact, then you can narrow down exactly what doorway, more than one in some cases, is taking in the contact, so that now you can put together a plan and devise a plan of how to eliminate this craving, desire, attachment. The other way that you can use a discourse like this is that if you're ever having contact with something and you're noticing discontentedness arising, all you need to do is break contact. So say, for example, you come together with a friend or family member and they're starting to be argumentative and impolite and disrespectful. And if you're noticing discontentedness starting to arise, like you're starting to become irritated or frustrated, instead of staying in that situation, you can break contact and move away. Take the eyes and the ears to another place. And don't allow the eyes and the ears to continue to have that contact, because then it's just triggering this craving. So if you can't control your mind and you're noticing that the mind isn't disciplined enough to sit there or stand there, you can just break contact and move away. This will preserve and protect your mind. This is guarding the doorways of discontentedness. And then more and more, as you cut off and let go of this arising discontentedness, you'll get to the point where those cravings don't exist anymore, and your mind can be perfectly content and peaceful no matter what contact you have. But in this transitionary period where your mind's transitioning, trying to get rid of these cravings, you might need to break contact sometimes. And this is another example, like if you're watching the news, or you're watching it and you're hearing it, right? So now you notice this frustration coming up, you turn off the news and you walk away. That's breaking contact with the sound and with the form that you're seeing with the eyes, and now the craving isn't getting triggered. So this will be able to help you in these kinds of situations. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this chapter. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. And it looks like Roxanne has a question. Go ahead, ma'am.
Oh, I was just wondering, I mean, in the situation that you gave about coffee, can you like never drink coffee again?
I would never drink any coffee that has caffeine in it. And I haven't found any coffee that I feel confident that doesn't have caffeine, although I've seen some online that is supposedly made out of mushrooms, and apparently it tastes really well like coffee, and it says absolutely no caffeine, because the decaf coffee, it has sometimes more caffeine than the actual caffeinated. They actually have done studies on this. They've gone into, well-known coffee roasters and people that are selling coffee, and they will test their coffee, and they find more caffeine in the decaf than in the caffeinated coffee. So it's not the coffee itself that is the problem. It is the caffeine. And you can get addicted to a sweet drink. Let's just say it doesn't have any caffeine. Let's just say someone's addicted to orange juice, and now they have a craving for orange juice. In that situation, you're going to need to still eliminate the craving, but you can ultimately go back and start drinking the orange juice at some point in the future. But something that has a stimulant like caffeine, you wouldn't be interested in going back, because it actually shakes up your mind and it degrades your mindfulness and your concentration, and that's what's going to hinder you from being able to get to enlightenment.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Vibhav is asking a question. What is discontentedness that is randomly arisen? So the Buddha is talking about different perspectives that other people have that he doesn't teach, which that's what he's talking about here. So randomly arisen would be ascetics or Brahmin who don't understand the Four Noble Truths, and they just think that discontentedness randomly pops up by itself, right? That we know that it's craving, desire, attachment that causes discontentedness. So what the Buddha is doing is getting you back closer to, when you study dependent origination, if you guys haven't done that yet, it goes from ignorance to volitional formations to consciousness to the name and form to the six sense bases, and then to contact, then feeling, then craving. So he's backing you up, and he's showing you that yes, in the Four Noble Truths, you understand that craving is the cause of discontentedness, but in order for a craving to get triggered, there has to be contact, so that no matter what you think about what is the cause of discontentedness, whether you know that it's craving, or whether you think that it's created by oneself, whether you think it's created by another person, whether you think it's created both by oneself and another, or if you think that discontentedness is arisen randomly, either way, it requires contact. That's what the Buddha is getting to. But all of these things that he's talking about here actually aren't why discontentedness arises. That even it's not even arise by oneself, because with oneself, that is the universal truth of non-self that the Buddha is teaching you, that it's not the self that arises it, it's the craving, desire, attachment. So discontentedness is caused by craving, desire, attachment, that longing, yearning, but that without contact wouldn't actually get triggered. So there needs to be contact through one of the six sense bases. So the Buddha is describing that no matter what you think, it's still dependent on contact. Okay, you're welcome, Vibhav. Okay, let's see if we have any other questions anywhere. All right, looks like Yihang has a question in YouTube. Teacher David, can we also say being wise and unwise could also be seen as equal, so that one doesn't get happy because one's wise and frustrated because of unwise decisions? Thank you. I don't see it as equal necessarily, right? But you would like to treat it that way. Like if you do something that's wise, instead of taking all this pleasure, like, wow, look how wise I am, look at what I did. That's the conceit coming in. And now you're going to get pleasant feelings in that situation. And then when you do something that's unwise, now you're going to have the painful feelings. So instead, just look at it as like, okay, my goal is to make wise decisions. I know that I'm a work in progress. You're not enlightened yet. And you're going to make some missteps along the way. You're going to make some unwise decisions. But each time you make an unwise decision, no matter what it is, look at it figure out what was the lack of wisdom that you had and cultivate that wisdom so that next time in that same situation, you won't make that same decision. And where you need help to cultivate the wisdom of where you maybe didn't have wisdom, that's where you reach out to your teacher and I'll help you to be able to cultivate the wisdom that you need. Because anytime there's an unwise decision, you're going to experience the unwholesome results. And now the natural law of karma, that unwholesome karma, that's the best, most unbiased teacher. The natural law of karma is going to show you every single second, where did you make an unwise decision? There's going to be craving, anger, and ignorance involved somewhere. So if you can cultivate the wisdom, now you can eliminate the craving and you won't experience the unwholesome results any longer. But if you have an unwise decision, you experience the unwholesome results and you just ignore it, now you're not going to be able to cultivate the wisdom. So that thing's just going to keep repeating over and over and over again. That's the cycle that just keeps repeating over and over and over again. So you're going to make mistakes. You're going to make missteps between now and enlightenment. Even in the third stage of enlightenment, you're going to be making small, minor missteps, right? But each one of those, just learn, look inward and figure out what's the lack of wisdom, where is the mind craving, is it angry, is it ignorant? Of course, in the third stage of enlightenment, you're not going to have any anger, but you understand, like, look for the pollutions. Where are the fetters being triggered? And now let me cultivate wisdom around this so that I can overcome it and it won't happen again. That's the way you'd like to treat each one of these situations. Okay, let me see if we have anything on Facebook. Okay, I'm not seeing anything there. So, all right, let's move to the next chapter. This is chapter 102. It looks like Pat's volunteering for that one. Go ahead, sir.
With the destruction of craving comes the destruction of unwholesome karma. Monks develop the path and way that leads to the destruction of craving. And what is the path and the way that leads to the destruction of craving? It is the 7 factors of enlightenment. What 7? The enlightenment factor of mindfulness, the enlightenment factor of investigation, the enlightenment factor of energy, the enlightenment factor of joy, the enlightenment factor of tranquility, the enlightenment factor of concentration, and the enlightenment factor of equanimity. When this was said, the Venerable Udayi asked the perfectly enlightened one, "Venerable Sir, how are the 7 factors of enlightenment developed and cultivated so that they lead to the destruction of craving?" Here, Udayi, a monk develops the enlightenment factor of mindfulness, which is based upon seclusion, freedom from strong feelings and elimination, maturing in release, which is immense, superb, measureless, without ill will. When he develops the enlightenment factor of mindfulness, which is based upon seclusion, freedom from strong feelings and elimination, maturing in release, which is immense, superb, measureless, without ill will, craving is abandoned. With the abandoning of craving, unwholesome karma is abandoned. With the abandoning of unwholesome karma, discontentedness is abandoned. All of the 7 factors of enlightenment are explained in the same way to include the enlightenment factor of investigation, energy, joy, tranquility, and concentration, with the final factor being described in the same way as in the below. He develops the enlightenment factor of equanimity, which is based upon seclusion, freedom from strong feelings, elimination, maturing in release, which is immense, superb, measureless, without ill will. When he develops the enlightenment factor of equanimity, which is based upon seclusion, freedom from strong feelings and elimination, maturing in release, which is immense, superb, measureless, without ill will, craving is abandoned. With the abandoning of craving, unwholesome karma is abandoned. With the abandoning of unwholesome karma, discontentedness is abandoned. Thus, Udayi, with the destruction of craving comes the destruction of unwholesome karma. With the destruction of unwholesome karma comes the destruction of discontentedness.
Okay, thank you, sir. So those of you guys that have been studying for a little while, you know that it's the Eightfold Path that leads to the elimination of craving, desire, attachment. That's what leads to the elimination of all unwholesome karma. So if you understand that, What the Buddha is now teaching you is that it's also the 7 factors of enlightenment that leads to the elimination of craving and leads to the elimination of unwholesome karma. This is why it's important to not look at the teachings of the Buddha in isolation. You need to look at them in the totality. He's not saying here that the 7 factors of enlightenment are the only thing that you need. You don't see that here. This is just one of other things that you need to actually learn and grow and develop in order to be able to get to enlightenment. The 7 factors of enlightenment aren't to determine whether you are enlightened or you aren't enlightened. They are a tool to fine-tune the mind. It's kind of like if you have a sculpture and you're trying to create a sculpture out of this big hunk of wood. When you first get this hunk of wood, you're going to be chucking off with your hatchet big chunks. And that's like wrong view, wrong intention, wrong speech, wrong action, wrong livelihood, wrong effort, wrong mindfulness, and wrong concentration. You're hucking those off this big chunk of wood in order to whittle it down to a point where you can now work with it. And then you start bringing in the other tools that are more fine tools, like maybe a little razor blade to kind of like make the wrinkles in the eye or the eyelashes or something like this, right? So the 7 factors of enlightenment are there for you to bring the mind up out of the sluggish condition. You use the investigation, energy, and joy. Whenever you notice the mind's dull or lethargic or complacent, that enlightenment factor of investigation, energy, and joy is going to uplift the mind. And where you notice the mind is overactive or anxiety or kind of bouncing around at a really high level, then you bring in the tranquility, the concentration, and the equanimity. And then you're just always practicing mindfulness. From the Eightfold Path, it's also one of the factors of enlightenment that your mindfulness is your awareness of mind. That's what's going to allow you to know whether your mind's sluggish or whether it's overactive. And now you employ the tool that you need to be able to help yourself. So sometimes the Buddha gets the reputation of being like a doctor, that there's a certain symptom and then there's a prescription. Well, you are your own best doctor. You need to become your own best doctor. The teacher can't be with you every single moment and tell you what's going on in your mind. You need to develop these qualities yourself. So if you know what the symptoms are and you know what the antidote or the remedy or the prescription is, then you can employ it at any given time. So if you're noticing that the mind's dull and lethargic and complacent, that's your mindfulness that's allowing you to be able to see that the mind's dull and lethargic. It's the enlightenment factor of investigation through investigating the teachings of the Buddha that's going to uplift the mind. Because you're going to start seeing through reading books, through watching videos, listening to podcasts, coming to classes, talking to your teacher, you're going to learn the things that you need to learn that your mind needs in order to be able to now spring up this energy in the mind. Like, oh my goodness, I'm finally getting the teachings that I've been interested to get my entire life. And this is where the joy comes into the mind. Then when you're noticing your mind's overactive, that's where you bring in the peacefulness. That's the tranquility. You bring in the concentration, which is the focus and the clarity. And then you bring in the equanimity, which is the calmness and composure, the evenness of temper. And you're going to need to apply right effort to be able to bring these into the mind. You can't press a button or anything. These get cultivated through meditation. You're going to see this when we get to volume 7. The Buddha teaches you about how breathing mindfulness meditation leads to the development of the 7 factors of enlightenment. So I've already been teaching you guys breathing mindfulness meditation from the very beginning because I know that this is what you need to develop and cultivate in order to get to this point where you can cultivate these other qualities. So everything's laid out in a way that's going to help you gradually develop your practice. So it's these 7 factors of enlightenment that you're going to need to use to fine-tune the mind, because as you're letting go of craving, your mind's going to tend to swing. Right? This is like a pendulum, that if your mind's holding on and chasing after things, as you start letting that go, your mind's going to tend to swing to the other side. And you might notice that you're dull and lethargic and complacent when your mind's over there, and that's not the middle way. And you're going to notice that there's no peace there. So you start letting that go and you start bringing your mind back towards the middle. But now as you do, you're going to overshoot the middle again, and you're going to go back towards craving. But you're not going to be craving as much as you were before. You'll be craving a little bit less, and now you'll realize your mind's not in the middle there, and you'll let that go, and now your mind will swing back and you'll kind of feel some dullness and lethargic again, and your mind's going to be swinging like this, and you're going to need to catch it with your mindfulness, and then you're going to need to employ the 7 factors of enlightenment to be able to bring it to the middle. And the more that you stay in the middle and you stay attentive to your mind, eventually it'll just stay there all the time. There's a lot of work and a lot of effort to bring your mind to the middle, but once it gets there and you stay there for longer and longer periods of time, it'll be effortless. But in the process of getting there, you need to cultivate these 7 factors and then employ them at the given time that you need them. So let me know if you guys have any questions here. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. Okay, looks like Samantha has a question. Go ahead, ma'am.
Did I understand you correctly that we will be learning in the future in more detail about the 7 factors of enlightenment?
I've taught them in the group learning program. You may not remember them because they were kind of introduced very briefly at the beginning of the group learning program. And then I kind of talked about them in more depth towards the end, the very last class. I have them in volume 1, chapter 3, and they're probably in this chapter as well. Nope, I didn't put them in here, but it's in volume 1, chapter 3, where you can see the 7 factors of enlightenment described. It describes the qualities of them. But then what I was mentioning is that in volume 7, the Buddha explains how breathing mindfulness meditation leads to the cultivation of the 7 factors of enlightenment. So if you're doing your breathing mindfulness meditation and you're practicing the Eightfold Path, that's what's going to lead to the cultivation of these qualities that you can then employ as part of the 7 factors of enlightenment. But you would like to learn about them, and that's in volume 1, chapter 3.
Okay, I'll go back and review. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And if you have any questions, just let me know. Okay, so I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So let's move to the next chapter. Is there someone who would like to read this one, chapter 103? Okay, looks like I got a couple hands here. We'll go with the first one, which was Roxanne, and then Keely, if you'd like to do the next one, we can come to you for the next one.
The destruction of excitement. Seeing rightly, he experiences the fading away of strong feelings. With the destruction of excitement comes destruction of craving. With the destruction of craving comes destruction of excitement. With the destruction of excitement and craving, the mind is said to be well liberated.
Okay, thank you, Roxanne. So here, the Buddha is describing the conditional pleasant feelings, and he's using excitement here, but this represents happiness, excitement, elation, thrill, exhilaration, euphoria, any of those pleasant feelings. What he's explaining is with the destruction of those pleasant feelings comes the destruction of craving. This is where I usually say that you need to see the conditional pleasant feelings as just as much a part of the problem as the painful ones. It's very intuitive to cut off the sadness and anger and frustration and all those other painful feelings. But if you don't understand that the pleasant feelings are part of the problem, you would never get to enlightenment. Because as long as you allow your mind to get the conditional pleasant feelings, it's just a matter of time before the painful ones come. So if you get sad every time it rains and you cut that off and cut that off and cut that off, you're not actually going to be able to ever eliminate this craving. Because what's happening is that when it's sunny outside, your mind is allowed to get the excitement or the pleasant feelings. And now the craving continues. So you're going to need to see these pleasant feelings is just as much a part of the problem. Remember, they're conditional pleasant feelings that based on some condition, your mind's now going to get excited. And that's where then when that condition changes, the painful feelings are going to come right behind that. And sometimes they're spread apart so far that you don't even notice it. And the example that I usually give is like if you get a brand new job and you get so excited with that brand new job, 3 years later, when you get laid off and you're feeling sad or frustrated, you allowed the mind to get the pleasant feelings when you first got the job 3 years ago. That's why those painful ones are coming, right? So by the time you get to enlightenment, you're going to be experiencing unconditional happiness, unconditional joy, where the mind's just always joyful. As long as you allow the mind to get conditional pleasant feelings, that it can only be happy or excited based on some condition, then that means your mind's still forming conditional feelings. So when you notice those bodily sensations coming up, not only with the painful feelings would you like to cut those off and let them go, but with the pleasant ones too. And they tend to be more subtle with the pleasant ones. You have to really have your mindfulness developed really closely and really well in order to spot those bodily sensations associated with the pleasant feelings. So pay attention to that with your mindfulness, and whenever you notice the conditional pleasant feelings, cut that off and let it go, because it's temporary, so therefore it's unsatisfying. You're disinterested in that. And when you cut that off and let it go, more and more you're going to see this joy and this brightness and this cheerfulness and this gladness coming through in the mind, because you can be happy no matter what. It's not just based on this condition that you can be happy. You can be happy no matter what. So you'd like to cut that off and let that go. And then when you're destroying the conditional pleasant feelings, you're eliminating the cravings, right? The mind's no longer allowed to form this conditional feeling. And with the destruction of craving comes the destruction of those pleasant feelings, the conditional ones. And then with the destruction of the excitement and craving, the mind is said to be well liberated. It's free, because now the cravings, desires, attachments are no longer producing the conditional pleasant feelings. It's not producing the conditional painful ones. And now this cheerfulness and this brightness and this radiance, this joy can come shining through, where you can be happy all the time, no matter what. If it's sunny outside, if it's raining outside, you can just be happy all the time. It doesn't matter, right? So that's what you would ultimately like to get to. Any questions on this one? Roxanne, you have a hand up. I don't know if that's from reading or if you have a question.
Yeah, I do have a question about this one. So I realize that in at some point in time that we will have that state of mind where you're happy, joyful, all of that. But in the meantime, I mean, like making plans to do things that interest you, there's a certain amount of, not necessarily craving, but a feeling of, oh, that would be a really good thing to do. That would make like a lot of people happy or me happy or whatever. I mean, whether it's start a business, write a book, plan a vacation. How do you stay in the middle, on the middle path when you're doing things like that?
Okay. Whenever you're coming up with, I would like to do this thing because it's going to make me happy, that's the craving, desire, attachment. That's the mind longing and yearning, that if I get this thing, I will be happy. Or if I get this thing, other people will be happy. That's conditional happiness. So if you would like to plan things because you know it's a wise decision and it's going to be enjoyable for you to go do this, then do it, right? But you would like to do it without conditional feelings. So I'll just give you an example that you guys are familiar with, that I just went to Mexico, right? When this was planned out, 9 months before, and the students approached me and said, hey, we would like you to come to Mexico. We'll support you to come. If we take care of you and support you, would you be willing to come? And I was like, yeah, of course, because I'm interested in sharing the teachings of the Buddha. That meets my goals. I can come there and I can share the teachings of the Buddha with others. And of course, I knew it's going to be fun to go see a new place. I'd never really been to this part of Mexico before. So I was interested to go, but it wasn't for the travel. It wasn't for to see the new things. I was there because I was interested in sharing the teachings of the Buddha. If I wasn't doing that, I wouldn't have been in Mexico. There was no reason for me to be there, right? So you can know with wisdom that, oh, this is a wise thing to do, and I would like to go do this. So whether it's earning money or writing a book or going on a holiday, it can just be like, hey, this would be a nice thing to do. It will be fun. I will enjoy, sharing, this travel experience with somebody. But you're not interested in allowing the mind to get conditional pleasant feelings. So for example, if you know you're going on a trip somewhere, rather than getting so excited, like, yay, I'm going to Australia. I can't wait. Oh my goodness, this is going to be so amazing. Instead, it's like, okay, well, we're making plans to go to Australia, right? And all the while in the back of your mind, you know this is impermanent, that something could happen and you may not get a chance to go to Australia, right? The planes could go on strike, the workers could go on strike, the planes could break down, there could be COVID and nobody's flying anywhere. So you would like to always remind yourself when you're making plans that, hey, this is going to be fun, this is going to be enjoyable, we're going to have a great time, but this is impermanent. And now let's just make our plans and move in that direction, fully realizing something can change at any moment. And now let's just say we're going and we're getting on the plane. It's like, sweet, let's go to Australia. Let's go have a good time and let's enjoy ourselves. Let's have some good food. Let's go see some nice scenery. Let's do this, that thing, and the other thing. So the mind needs to learn how to have fun without conditional pleasant feelings. This is what the unenlightened mind doesn't know how to do, because all we've ever done was chase after our cravings. We get excited and now that's fun for us. But then something doesn't go to our liking and now the mind's angry or sad or frustrated or something else. So the mind, it's almost like getting a new pair of shoes, that if you put on a new pair of shoes, you kind of got to get acclimated to these new pair of shoes before they feel comfortable on your feet. And the enlightened mind is that way. You need to come into this middle way. You need to train your mind in this way. And it may not even feel 100% comfortable. But when you're moving in this direction towards enlightenment, more and more you kind of grow into this mind and it starts to feel more and more comfortable, because you realize by not allowing the mind to get those conditional pleasant feelings, you don't experience the painful ones. And more you can just have fun no matter what you're doing. Whether you're sitting in the middle of an airport waiting for a flight that got delayed and you're sitting there on a 3-hour delay, you can still have fun. And your fun isn't dependent on hurrying up and getting to Mexico or Australia or somewhere else. You can just have fun no matter where you're at, no matter what you're doing. And this is something that the mind has to grow into.
Okay, so it's all a matter of doing and planning things in your life without expectation.
Yes, 100%.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, always reminding yourself of impermanence, that these things are impermanent, having no expectation, but at the same time making wise decisions that lean towards what it is that you're looking to accomplish. Fully realizing that at any point, some impermanence can pop in and everything changes.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. And then you just change with it. So an example of this is I left Thailand with the thought that I would like to teach all the classes while I was gone. I was on the road and I was going to teach the classes on the road. I was going to teach the classes back here in Chiang Mai. And I was able to start doing that. The first few classes I was able to teach from Mexico. But then we got on a bus and we were headed south, and this bus got into a traffic jam and I wasn't able to teach a class. And it was like, all right, well, no big deal. I'll cancel the class. The students will have some impermanence. My feelings aren't being formed on that. So my intention was to teach all the classes, but I think I missed maybe 3 or 4 while I was traveling. So I had the intention to teach them all, but the fact that I didn't teach them all, the mind could remain peaceful and joyful, because this is just impermanence and there was nothing I could do to make the situation different.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. All right. Great questions there. Let me see if we have any questions anywhere else. Okay, we have a bunch coming in from Yihang here on YouTube. I wonder if when conditional happiness decline, that's why the conditional painful feeling is there. From this logic, is it true that when cutting off the conditional happiness, there will also be pain? Yes. Because your mind has cravings in it, and it's craving certain things, and you have gotten conditional pleasant feelings from that craving multiple times, as you start cutting that off and letting it go, this is the painful feelings are going to now come in. And this is where the mind has to walk through the fire in order to appreciate the fresh air on the other side. It's like you got into the mafia and now you got to get out. You got to walk your way out, right? So we got these cravings at some point during our life and we've been getting all these pleasant feelings from them. But now that we're cutting them off and letting them go, the mind's not getting what it wants, which is that craving fulfilled. And now, because you're cutting it off and letting it go, these painful feelings are going to start coming into the mind. And now you got to walk through that fire in order to appreciate the fresh air on the other side. You got to get out of the mafia. But once you get out, now it's like, whoa, this is so great, because my mind can be happy no matter what I do, right? So yes, that's exactly why those painful feelings come in there. And then Yihang asked more, because I feel it's much more difficult to cut off the conditional happiness. Almost feels like there's a pain there. Thank you, Teacher David. Yeah, that's exactly why, because of what I just described. So you're going to experience these painful feelings on your way out the door. This is you extinguishing your unwholesome karma. That's what the Buddha talked about in the previous discourse, that you need to use the 7 factors of enlightenment to extinguish your unwholesome karma. The unwholesome karma is that we've been making decisions based in craving, anger, and ignorance. And that's where the pollution of mind is. And now when you're getting rid of your cravings, you're going to experience your unwholesome karma, which is your painful feelings. You've got to experience those. And now you extinguish that by cutting those off. Or in some cases, the mind's just going to experience it. But if you've cut off the pleasant ones and cut off the pleasant ones and cut off the pleasant ones, you're going to get some painful feelings there as you're walking out the door. But then when you get past that, that's where the peace comes in. Now, I'll use this example to help you guys understand this. Not that everyone's at this point, but let's just say you were interested in getting rid of sexual desire, sensual desire related to sexual contact, right? When or if you ever do this, it's your choice. But when your craving for sex is arising, if you cut that off and let it go, it's going to be painful. It's going to hurt that you're not going out to have sex, where before you would just go out and have sex and do whatever you're going to do, and now you get all these pleasant feelings. But then later on, you're going to get the painful ones when you can't get sex. So when the sexual cravings are arising and you're cutting that off and letting it go, it can feel quite painful for the mind. But then once you finally get rid of this craving in the mind, now the mind doesn't have that craving anymore for sexual contact, and it's not bothering you anymore. You're not agitated anymore because it's completely gone. But you have to walk through those painful feelings in order to get to the point where the mind fully lets go. So that's great observation there, Yihang. That's exactly what's happening. Okay, let me see what else we've got here. Looks like we have a question from Zanab Sharif. Let's see. Hi, hope you doing well, all of you. I'm just new here. Just want to ask about marriage and relationships. What about this experience and how can we live without creeping? I would suggest that you contact me privately so we can discuss that. We're focused on these discourses here, and I'd like to be sure that we have time to cover them all. But since it's your first time, if you would like to contact me privately, you can find all my information on the website, buddhadailywisdom.com, and we can talk about it through private message or email or however you'd like to do that. You can even post it in our Facebook group if you like. Okay, these are all the questions that I'm seeing. So I'm going to move to chapter 104. Is there someone who would like to read this? I think it was Keely that was going to volunteer. Yeah, there you go, Keely.
The destruction of craving is nibbana, enlightenment. Venerable Sir, it is said a being, in what way? Venerable Sir, is one called a being? One is stuck, rather, tightly stuck in desire, longing, excitement, and craving for form. Therefore, one is called a being. One is stuck, tightly stuck in desire, longing, excitement, and craving for feelings. Therefore, one is called a being. One is stuck, tightly stuck in desire, longing, excitement, and craving for perceptions. Therefore, one is called a being. One is stuck, lightly stuck in desire, longing, excitement, and craving for feelings. Therefore, one is called a being. One is stuck, tightly stuck in desire, longing, excitement, and craving for volitional formations, choices, decisions. Therefore, one is called a being. One is stuck, tightly stuck in desire, longing, excitement, craving for consciousness. Therefore, one is called a being. Suppose Radha, some little boys or girls are playing with sand castles. So long as they are not free of desire, longing, excitement, thirst, passion, and craving for those sand castles. They cherish them, play with them, treasure them, and treat them possessively. But when those little boys and girls lose their desire, longing, excitement, thirst, passion, and craving for those sandcastles, then they scatter them with their hands and feet, demolish them, shatter them, and put them out of play. So too, Radha, scatter form, demolish it, shatter it, put it out of play, practice for the destruction of craving, scatter feeling, scatter perception, scatter volitional formations, choices, decisions, scatter consciousness, demolish it, shatter it, put it out of play, practice for the destruction of craving. For the destruction of craving, Radha, is Nibbana, enlightenment. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Keely. So what the Buddha is doing here is he's talking about the 5 aggregates or the 5 collections. These are the 5 things that determine what a living being is. There's form, feelings, perceptions, volitional formations, and consciousness. What form is the physical form. And remember, you can independently verify this as I'm teaching it to you, because you know you're a living being, that there's this physical form. That's the first criteria or the first element or the first aggregate that determines a living being, is the form. Then there's feelings. This is the conditional pleasant feelings, painful feelings, neither painful nor pleasant. Then there's perceptions. This is your views and opinions about the world, how you think about the world when you look out at the world. Then there's volitional formations, which are your choices and decisions. A living being is going to have free will choices that they make. And then there's a consciousness or the mind. So these are the 5 things that determine a living being is a living being. And you can look at every living being in the world, and they're going to have all 5 of these things: form, feelings, perceptions, volitional formations, which are choices and decisions, and then a consciousness or the mind. And then you can look at something that you know is not a living being, like this electronic device that you're listening to this on. Does it have physical form? Yeah, it has physical form, but it doesn't have feelings. It doesn't have perceptions. It doesn't have views and opinions about the world. It doesn't have choices and decisions. Any choice that electronic device is making is coming from a human being. A human being has made that choice. And then there's the consciousness, and it doesn't have a mind. It doesn't have a consciousness. So here you can discern exactly what is a living being and what isn't a living being. And this actually helps you to apply something like the first precept, because you're disinterested in killing a living being. Anytime you kill a living being, you're causing harm, so harm is going to come back to you. So these 5 elements or these 5 criteria or these 5 aggregates are helping you to be able to practice the 5 precepts more closely, particularly that first precept. But then what the Buddha is teaching you here is that in order to get free of the cycle of rebirth, you need to not cling to the 5 aggregates for yourself. That if you cling to this physical form, wanting the form of the body to look a certain way, and every little pimple, every little mole, every little gray hair, you get shaken up by that, you're clinging to the form. Or if you cling to your feelings, like I am angry, I am frustrated, or you're clinging to like happiness or excitement, those temporary conditional feelings. If you're clinging to those, you'll never get free. You'll be tightly stuck. If you cling to your perceptions, which are your views and opinions about the world, maybe your political views or your other views about other things, if you cling to these, then you're stuck. You're tightly stuck, right? So you would like to get free of those. And then the same thing with your volitional formations or your choices and decisions. If you cling to these, then you're tightly stuck. You might be making a decision to go somewhere 3 months from now, but then things change. And maybe you hold on and you cling to that decision. You're not willing to let it go. So you need to be willing to let go of your decisions as you experience impermanence. You could make a decision 10 months in advance, but as you get closer, impermanence happens and it's no longer a wise decision anymore. And you need to be willing to let go and never hold on to these decisions to begin with. And just understand, like we were saying just now, is that whenever you're making decisions and planning a vacation, for example, remind yourself that this is impermanent, that it may or may not actually happen. And that would help you to not stay stuck clinging to your choices and decisions or your volitional formations. And then you've got the mind itself, like the self-identity, that if you cling to this, then you're stuck, you're tightly stuck, and you're not interested in clinging to anything that's in the mind, holding on to it, right? So the Buddha is teaching you to be able to scatter these. And he gives this analogy of the little boys and girls with the sandcastles. That if you've ever played with sandcastles, when you were playing with them, you were so observant about them. When the water was coming, you tried to get the water away. You tried to protect this sandcastle because you were possessive over it and you were having a craving and a desire to keep it looking a certain way. But then eventually, when you lose your desire, your longing, yearning, you scatter it. You just kind of like knock it all down and you could care less. And that's what the Buddha is teaching you to do with these 5 aggregates. You need to come to this middle way where you're not clinging and holding on to them, but you're also not over here and you're not paying any attention to them either. Because like this physical form, you need to feed the body healthy food, you need to practice good hygiene and things like this, you need to get medical checks and things of this nature, but you need to do it in a way where you're not clinging, right? So that's what the Buddha is teaching you, is to scatter all of this where you're not clinging to it and holding on to it tightly. So let me know what questions you guys have here, because this is part of what you need to be able to do in order to get to enlightenment, is eliminate any clinging to the 5 aggregates: the form, feelings, perceptions, volitional formations, which are choices and decisions in the consciousness. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So we'll move to the next one, which is chapter 105. Is there someone who would like to read this? Okay, if there's no one who's going to read, then maybe I'll read. It's a short one. Okay, so this one is chapter 105. It's titled Excitement is Discontentedness. As a consequence of this, excitement arises. Excitement in consciousness is clinging. With one's clinging as condition, existence comes to be. With existence as condition, birth. With birth as condition, aging and death, sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair come to be. Such is the origin of this whole mass of discontentedness. Okay, so this is the Buddha kind of giving you a little piece of dependent origination. This is kind of like the tail end of dependent origination. He's showing you how clinging to those 5 aggregates is going to lead to continuous rebirth and discontentedness. Because in the previous discourse, he was talking about eliminating clinging to the 5 aggregates. Well, now he's explaining to you that any clinging, it's going to lead to existence, where there's going to be an existence. And then with an existence, there's going to be birth. And then if there's birth, there's going to be aging and death. There's going to be sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair. This is how this whole mass of discontentedness comes about. So if you allow the excitement to come into the mind, and you allow the mind to hold on and cling to these pleasant feelings, to this excitement, then you're just keeping the cycle going over and over and over again. That's what I was saying, that the pleasant feelings, the excitement, it leads to the painful feelings. You can't get away from the painful feelings if you keep holding on to the temporary pleasant feelings. So you need to be willing to let go of the temporary pleasure in order to be able to get to the permanent peacefulness, the permanent happiness, the permanent joy. And the Buddha is just showing you that here in a step-by-step fashion. Any questions here on this one? Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So we'll go to the next one, which is 106. So someone who would like to read this? Okay, Pat, go ahead, sir.
A stream enterer is worth more than being a wheel-turning monarch. Monks, although a wheel-turning monarch, having exercised supreme sovereign rulership over the 4 continents, with the breakup of the body after death, is reborn in a good destination, in a heavenly world, in the company of the heavenly beings of the heavenly realm, and there in the Nandana grove, accompanied by an entourage of heavenly nymphs. He enjoys himself, supplied and endowed with the 5 chords of heavenly sensual pleasure. Still, as he does not possess 4 things, he is not freed from hell, the animal realm, and the realm of afflicted spirits, not freed from the plane of misery, the bad destinations, the netherworld. Although, monks, a noble disciple maintains himself by lumps of alms food and wears rag robes, still As he possesses four things, he is freed from hell, the animal realm, and the realm of afflicted spirits, freed from the plane of misery, the bad destinations, the netherworld. What are the four? Here, monks, the noble disciple possesses confirmed confidence in the Buddha thus: the Tathagata is an arahant, perfectly enlightened, accomplished in true wisdom and conduct, fortunate, knower of the worlds, unsurpassed leader of persons to be tamed, teacher of heavenly beings and humans, the enlightened one, the fortunate one. He possesses confirmed confidence in the teachings thus: the teachings are well expounded by the perfectly enlightened one, directly visible, immediate, inviting one to come and see, applicable to be personally experienced by the wise. He possesses confirmed confidence in the community thus: the community of the perfectly enlightened one's disciples is practicing the wholesome way, practicing the straight way, practicing the true way, practicing the proper way. That is, the four pairs of persons, the 8 types of individuals. This community of the perfectly enlightened one's disciples is worthy of gifts, worthy of hospitality, worthy of offerings, worthy of respectful salutation, the unsurpassed field of merit for the world. He possesses the virtues, moral conduct, dear to the noble ones, unbroken, untorn, unblemished, unblotched, liberating, praised by the wise, not misunderstood, and leading to concentration. He possesses these four things, and, monks, between the obtaining of sovereignty over the 4 continents and the obtaining of the 4 things, the obtaining of sovereignty over the 4 continents is not worth a 16th part of the obtaining of the 4 things.
Okay, thank you, Pat. First, let's talk about what a wheel-turning monarch is. I'm not sure that we've had this discourse yet in the program. What a wheel-turning monarch is this is an individual who's in a leadership role where they're now guiding this population of people through the teachings of the Buddha. So during the lifetime of the Buddha, this would have been like a king or a queen who had a certain population of people, maybe 10,000, 20,000, 100,000 people living in a certain vicinity. And now as they're making decisions about the kingdom, they're doing so through the teachings of the Buddha to a certain degree. And what the Buddha is saying is that this person who's doing this, yeah, they're going to be able to get to this heavenly realm, but they're still not free from the lower realms. They could still be reborn in the hell realm, the animal realm, or the afflicted spirit realm. And while this is very beneficial for the world to have a wheel-turning monarch, it's not as good as someone who gets to the first stage of enlightenment. And that's what is needed here, among other things, to be able to get to the first stage of enlightenment is you need to have these 4 things. The reason why it's called a wheel-turning monarch is because it's referring to the Dhamma wheel, that it's turning the wheel of the Dhamma. Even though a Buddha is the one who does this, that the Buddha refers to this type of individual as a wheel-turning monarch because they're helping to bring the teachings of the Buddha into the world. And nowadays, this could be potentially a prime minister or a president or even like a CEO of a company or something like that. If this person is guiding these people and making decisions in the company through the teachings of the Buddha, this is going to be very wonderful for all those people. And this is going to be helpful for the world. But the Buddha says this isn't nearly as beneficial as someone who has these 4 things. If someone has these 4 things, he's saying this is really wonderful. And what that is confidence in the Buddha, the Tathagata, the fully perfectly enlightened one. And the way that you get to that confidence in him is through learning and practicing his teachings. The more you understand his teachings and you practice them and you see they actually work to improve the condition of the mind in your life, you will gain more and more confidence in the Buddha. Right now, you might not have confidence in him, and that's okay. You might have doubt in your mind. But more and more, as you implement these teachings and you see the progress to your mind and your life, you'll gain more and more confidence in him. And that's where you gain confidence in the teachings as well, that through investigating and examining the teachings, through reflecting on them to verify that they're true, and then practicing them, that's where you gain confidence in his teachings. Then you start gaining confidence in the community, that the community that you're part of, the teacher, the other members of the community, you can see people are practicing well, that they're polite, they're kind, they're friendly, they're supportive, they're respectful. You start seeing this in the community that you're part of, and you start gaining this confidence in the people that are practicing the teachings of the Buddha. And that comes through interacting within the community. And the Buddha gives you some guidance here about that. And then the fourth thing is that you're practicing a certain level of moral conduct. This is like the 5 precepts, the base level of right speech, right action, right livelihood. If you're practicing the moral conduct, that means you're not causing harm through your moral conduct. You've cultivated enough wisdom where you're practicing right speech, right action, right livelihood, which includes the 5 precepts, and now practicing that, you're not going to be causing harm. So this is going to help actually produce more and more concentration in your mind. If you ever go to sleep at night wondering or scared of whether or not you'd caused any harm that day, that's because your mind hasn't cultivated the wisdom to know what would or wouldn't be harm, and you're not yet practicing it 100%. But the more and more that you're practicing this good, wholesome moral conduct, you'll be able to have concentration because you know you're not harming anyone, so therefore harm isn't going to come to you. So these are the 4 things that the Buddha is saying this would actually be much better than ruling over all 4 continents. So during the lifetime of the Buddha, they were aware of 4 continents, right? So now we know we have more than 4 continents. But during his lifetime, they understood that there were 4, right? Because they hadn't had information of anything more than that. So what he's basically saying here is, if you obtained sovereignty over the entire world, that wouldn't be nearly as beneficial as if you actually had these 4 things, because these 4 things is what's going to lead to your enlightenment. Because if you have these 4 things, you're most likely in the first stage of enlightenment or very close to it. And having gotten there, your mind will continue to progress forward, potentially getting to enlightenment in this life. So having confidence in the Buddha, the teachings, the community, and practicing virtuous moral conduct, this is what's going to promote better and better qualities of mind and set you up to be able to get to enlightenment. Let me know what questions you guys have on this chapter. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. So it looks like we have a question, or maybe even 2, coming in from Samantha. Samantha asked, are there any examples of wheel-turning monarchs in current times? So I would consider King Rama number 9, that was passed away in 2016. He was definitely a wheel-turning monarch. He was probably even more than that. He might have been in the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, or even 4th stage of enlightenment. I never had the honor to meet him, but based on what I know about his life, it seems like he was practicing the teachings really well, and he was guiding Thailand in that way. And this is why people absolutely adore the Rama number 9. The vast majority of the kingdom of Thailand really adore him. And this is because he was practicing the teachings very well. You might look at other people in the world around you. Maybe you can look at certain qualities of mind where people are practicing really well. And typically these people aren't on the front page of the news, right? Usually the people that are there are doing things that are unwholesome oftentimes. The way that our news works is they tend to report on the unwholesome things. So usually the people who are doing the wholesome things, they're back in the background doing their wholesome things. They're not doing it in order to get on the front page of the newspaper. They could care less about those things. They're just interested in doing wholesome things in the world. So you'll have to look around and see. I'm sure there's kings and queens and prime ministers and presidents and other CEOs and things like this in the world that are doing really wholesome things, and we might consider them a wheel-turning monarch. And then here's some more from Samantha. Specifically, no one comes to mind who is guiding countries or businesses by using the Buddhist teachings in present times. Okay, yeah, so the one that I can think of is King Rama number 9. I don't know enough about all the world leaders to know exactly if there's anyone else that's doing those kinds of things, but I'm sure there probably is somewhere out there. Okay, let me see if we have any questions. Nope, we have no questions anywhere else. So we'll go on to the next one, which is chapter 107. Anybody would like to read this one? All right, looks like Leo. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, thank you, David. A confident stream entry. Monks, the eye is permanent, changing, becoming otherwise. The ear is impermanent, changing, becoming otherwise. The nose is impermanent, changing, becoming otherwise. The tongue is impermanent, changing, becoming otherwise. The body is impermanent, changing, becoming otherwise. The mind is impermanent, changing, becoming otherwise. One who places confidence in these teachings and persistent in them thus is called a confident stream entry. One who has entered the fixed course of rightness, entered the plane of wholesome persons, transcended the plane of the worldlings. He is incapable of doing any deed by reason of which he might be reborn in hell, in the animal realm, or in the realm of afflicted spirits. He is incapable of passing away without having realized the fruit of stream enterer.
Okay. Thank you, Leo. So the Buddha would talk about these different types of stream enterers. He would talk about a confident stream enterer, and he would talk about a teaching stream enterer. You're going to see that, I think, here in a moment, where there's this different kind of ways in order to get into the first stage of enlightenment. And one comes from confidence, and one comes from really investigating the teachings. Oftentimes, nowadays, these things happen together. Essentially, to get to the first stage of enlightenment, you need to eliminate the first three fetters, but there's other things that you need to cultivate in the mind as well. Like you need to know the six sense bases, you need to know the five aggregates, you need to know dependent origination. You need to not only have established right view, but you need to have accomplishment in right view. You need to practice generosity and have accomplishment in generosity. There's multiple things that you need in order to really get to the point where you're in that first stage of enlightenment. And there's a retreat in January that I teach each January where it's everything that you need to get to the first stage of enlightenment. So that's going to be coming up here in a matter of months. So if you guys would like to attend that either live here in Chiang Mai or through the recordings or through the live streams, you can attend, where you're learning everything you need in order to get to that first stage of enlightenment. And having gotten to that first stage of enlightenment, it's a very pivotal point in your development, because from that point your mind will not regress backwards. It's impossible for your mind to regress backwards, and you'll never be reborn into the lower realms ever again. So getting to that first stage is very pivotal, because from that point forward you'll only make forward progress. So one of the ways to think about the first stage of enlightenment is that if you were going to hike Mount Everest, you've maybe at base camp, right? You haven't gotten to the summit yet, but you're at base camp, and you have all the equipment, all the knowledge, all the wisdom, everything you need to be able to get to the summit, but you just haven't done it yet. And now you're at base camp, kind of waiting for your opportunity to progress forward to the additional camps to eventually get to the summit. So when you get to the first stage of enlightenment, you will have everything you need in order to get to enlightenment. You're still going to need guidance. You're still going to need help from your teacher, but you will have collected up the true teachings of the Buddha. You will have access to those. You would have developed your wisdom to a certain point and developed your mind to a certain point. You'll have things like the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, the Seven Factors of Enlightenment, the Five Precepts, meditation training. You'll have all these different things that you'll understand, and you'll even have a teacher by that point. You're not going to just stumble into the first stage of enlightenment. There was concerted effort to be able to get there. Now that you've collected up all these things, it's a matter of continuing to learn, continuing to grow, continuing to develop, and now you'll make your way from that first stage of enlightenment to enlightenment itself. And here the Buddha is talking about that, about this confident stream enter, one who has confidence in moving into this first stage of enlightenment. So any questions here on this chapter? Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. So let's go to this next chapter. I think it's the teaching stream enterer. Okay, someone would like to read this one? Okay, Leo and Samantha. Okay, a bunch of hands there. Okay, let's go with Samantha, Leo, since you just read the last one, and then we'll go to Roxanne and then back to Leo.
A teaching stream entry. One for whom these teachings are understood thus, after being pondered a sufficient degree with wisdom, is called a teachings stream entry. One who has entered the fixed course of rightness, entered the plane of wholesome persons, transcended the plane of the worldlings. He is incapable of doing any deed by reason of which he might be reborn in hell, in the animal realm, or in the realm of afflicted spirits. He is incapable of passing away without having realized the fruit of stream entry.
Okay, this is very similar to the last discourse. Thank you, by the way, Samantha. Very similar to the last discourse. He's just talking about this other type of stream entry. But ultimately, the goal would be to acquire all the teachings and everything that you need to get to base camp. And that's what I teach in that retreat coming up in January. So it looks like Vibhav has some questions here. It might have been related to the last chapter and then this one too. He says, there are certain texts which state that people move into stream entry just by hearing the words of the Buddha. Is that true? There are some places in the Pali Canon where we can see that that's true, but and that's what they're teaching, but I've never seen it for myself. And it's not just that they heard the words of the Buddha. It's that somebody has already been learning some different things other places that you could actually have already learned the 5 precepts, for example, in some other ways because they're the natural laws of existence. Maybe grandma and grandpa taught those to you and you've been practicing them to a certain degree. They weren't from the teachings of the Buddha, but they're the natural laws that people tend to know, that it's unwise to kill, steal, have sexual misconduct, to lie, or take intoxicants, right? So now, as somebody has maybe done a little bit of training, they've got a certain amount of moral conduct and so forth and so on. Now, I suspect what's happened is that they now are hearing the teachings of the Buddha for the first time, and there's a couple little things that are keeping them hung up and not able to get to the first stage of enlightenment. And now when they hear those couple of things, now it helps them move into the first stage of enlightenment. Because there's multiple things that you need to learn in order to get to the first stage of enlightenment. And I've seen the places in the Pali Canon where people talk about these kinds of things, but I've never seen it for myself. So until I independently verify it, I can't say with 100% certainty that this is true, but I have seen it documented in the Pali Canon. And much of the Pali Canon is 100% true. So there's no reason why I would suspect that it's untrue. So if it is true, this is the way that I suspect that it happens, as I described here. Vibhav is asking more. There are certain texts which state that people move into stream entry. Okay, that's the same thing, just twice. Okay, you're welcome, Vibhav. Pleased to help you. Okay, so looks like Samantha maybe has a question. Go ahead, ma'am.
Yes, I'm just wondering about why the differentiation between teaching, stream entry, and confident. The confident almost seems, the way it's worded, that it might be someone who hears the teachings and just accepts them, versus the teachings where the student appears to have done more research and independent verification.
Yeah.
Am I not understanding it correctly?
Yeah, that's the way it looks on the surface, but from the way that I understand stream entry is that every stream enter is going to need to have confidence in order to get into the first stage of enlightenment. Every stream enter is going to need to investigate the teachings to a certain degree. Every stream enter is going to have to eliminate those first 3 fetters. Every stream enterer is going to need to have accomplishment in view, accomplishment in generosity. They're going to need to understand the dependent origination and all these other things. And you're going to see, if you end up taking that retreat in January, you watch the recordings, you're going to see where I show you the words of the Buddha that talk about this. So the Buddha was talking here, I think, about kind of like prerequisites to get into the first stage of enlightenment. I don't think he's necessarily saying like you only need to do one or the other in order to get into the first stage of enlightenment. I think he's kind of like talking about the prerequisites that's kind of preparing you to be able to get into the first stage of enlightenment. Is that's having confidence in investigating the teachings. Those are 2 things that are prerequisites. And then there's very specific teachings that you would need to know in order to be able to train your mind to get to the point to move into the first stage of enlightenment.
So basically, you're probably both.
Yeah.
Confident. Okay.
Exactly. You would need to be both in order to be able to get into the first stage of enlightenment, because you're going to need to have confidence and you're going to need to have investigated the teachings to a certain degree. Okay. So let me see if we have any questions anywhere else. All right. I'm not seeing anything. So I lost track. I think it's Roxanne is up and then Leo after this. So go ahead, Roxanne.
6 cases of incompatibility by one accomplished in view. Monks. there are 6 cases of incompatibility. What 6? One accomplished in view is 1, incapable of depriving his mother of life. 2, incapable of depriving his father of life. 3, incapable of depriving an arahant of life. 4, incapable of shedding the Tathagata's blood with the mind of hatred. Incapable of creating a division in the community. Incapable of acknowledging another teacher. These are the 6 cases of incompatibility.
Okay, thank you, Roxanne. So you're going to see that the Buddha has several teachings about the 6 cases of incompatibility in order to have accomplishment in view. I teach these in that retreat in January. This is just one of many discourses. I think he has maybe like 4 to 6 different discourses where he lists out 6 unique things that someone who is going to have accomplishment in view will be practicing by the time that you have accomplishment in view. And this is what's going to help you to be able to get to the first stage of enlightenment. So this is just one of them, where he says you'd be incapable of essentially killing your mother or your father. Because by the time you have accomplishment in view, you understand that this human life is the very best thing that you could ever have. And it was your mother and father that helped you to acquire that. And if it wasn't for them, you wouldn't be able to have this opportunity to get to enlightenment. So there'd be no way for you to ever kill your mother and father. Then the same thing is true about an arahant, that by the time you've cultivated your mind to a certain degree, having accomplishment in view, you would know how important an enlightened being is to the world. And having an enlightened being in the world is the very best thing for anything. To have an enlightened being in the community, even if they're not teaching, just kind of interacting in the community, they're going to do things in a different way. And people are going to kind of observe this and notice this and be able to learn from that. So you wouldn't be able to kill an enlightened being because you would know how important that is in the world. And then the same thing is true about a Tathagata or a Buddha, that you would know how important that individual is in the world, and that you wouldn't actually be interested in shedding this person's blood or killing a Buddha. And then you also wouldn't be able to create division in the community because you would know how important the community is, and that this community is who helped you to be able to get to that first stage of enlightenment. You would be incapable of creating, skiffs or breaking up the community or trying to get one person to rival against another one and kind of separating and splitting out the community. And then you'd also be incapable of acknowledging another teacher, because by the time you get to this first stage of enlightenment, your discontentedness is significantly diminished. It's a mere fraction of what it once was. And you will notice that about your mind. You will notice the concentration and the clarity that is in the mind. And you will know with 100% certainty that it's these teachings that are leading to your enlightenment. You're not enlightened yet, but you're going to have enough improvement to the condition of the mind that you would be incapable of doing any of these things, including acknowledging another teacher, because you would know that it's this teacher's teachings that led to your first stage of enlightenment and this massive improvement to the mind. And that's why you wouldn't create division in the community. You wouldn't kill any of these 4 individuals, because you know how important it is for other people to also experience this first stage of enlightenment and beyond. And no matter what you're experiencing in the first stage of enlightenment, it's nothing compared to what you experience once the mind's actually enlightened. So you need to stay dedicated and determined and diligent to continuing to progress on the path. Don't allow any complacency to come into the mind so that you can continue to make forward progress. So let me know what questions you guys have here. It looks like Roxanne has questions. Go ahead, ma'am.
I was just wondering, do you think that incapable of depriving, he's also like just thinking about disrespect? Because, the fact that you would be in the community at all and that you would be thinking about taking a person's life seems to be pretty over the top to me.
Yeah, in the first stage of enlightenment, you still have ill will. So there's the potential for somebody to still be interested in doing those kinds of things, right? Even in the second stage of enlightenment, there's still ill will. Not, I don't think, to the point of being interested to kill somebody, but this could potentially go through the mind. This is referring to killing, because these first 5 right here, one of the ways that some people talk about them is they call them the 5 heinous crimes.
Wow.
That's the way that they're oftentimes referred to. So it is about killing and taking life for those first 4.
Okay, thank you.
And also, I'll add to that by the time somebody gets to the first stage of enlightenment, they will already be practicing the Eightfold Path, where they've eliminated wrong behavior and wrong observances. So that part of the Eightfold Path where we talk about right action, where you have abandoned the taking of life, which is the first precept, you wouldn't not only be able to not kill these 4 people, you wouldn't kill anybody, right? In terms of out of anger or hatred. Like if there was somebody who was, breaking into your house and they had a gun and you had to take this person's life in order to save your own life, you might do something like that, but you would be able to do that without having broken any kind of natural laws, because this is the natural law of karma actually coming to that person and they're experiencing the results of their decisions. But you wouldn't initiate and go out on the street, based in your own anger, to be able to kill anybody, including these 4 people.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so it looks like, Leo, you're up for this next one. I don't see any. Oh, here we go. The 5 heinous crimes, or the 5 heinous unwholesome acts. That's the first 5. Okay. All right. So, Leo, this is for you, number 110.
Thank you. Final knowledge is achieved by gradual training. Monks, I do not say that final knowledge, wisdom, is achieved all at once. On the contrary, final knowledge is achieved by gradual training, by gradual practice, by gradual progress. And how does there come to be gradual training, gradual practice, gradual progress? Here, one who has confidence in the teacher visits him. When he visits him, he pays respect to him. When he pays respect to him, he gives ear. One who gives ear hears the teachings. Having heard the teachings, he memorized them. He examines the meaning of the teachings he has memorized. When he examines their meaning, he gains a reflective understanding of those teachings. When he has gained a reflective understanding of those teachings, enthusiasm springs up in him. When enthusiasm has sprung up, he applies his will. Having applied his will, he investigates. Having investigates, he strives. Purposely striving, he will realize with the ultimate truth and sees it by penetrating it with wisdom.
Okay, thank you, Leo. So here, this is a discourse that can help you come to understand a few things. The first one is, one of the biggest myths that we have in the Buddhist world is people think that the Buddha sat under a tree, he meditated, and he instantly got to enlightenment. Well, you can see here in his own words that this isn't actually true. There's no such thing as instantaneous enlightenment. You need to have this gradual training, gradual practice, and gradual progress. This is the way the Buddha is describing that it has occurred. And that's why, you'll see in the Pali Canon, not only Vibha, where people talk about instantly getting to the first stage of enlightenment, sometimes they even talk about instantly getting to enlightenment itself as well. And this is where, that's kind of suspect, because of impermanence, these things could have been changed. So we know that it's gradual training, gradual practice, and gradual progress that leads to any kind of improvement to the mind. So if those things were occurring, there was some work that they had done before that to be able to actually experience that. So it wasn't just instantaneous that the Buddha got to enlightenment. And it's the same thing for you. You're going to need gradual training, gradual practice, and gradual progress. And you can independently verify this because everything you've ever done has been that way. Whether it's learning to read, write, and speak English, or any kind of job or occupation, it's been gradual training, gradual practice, and gradual progress that you've been able to accomplish that. So that's how you can independently verify this through your own active experiences in your day-to-day life. Then the Buddha here is explaining to you that you need a teacher in order to be able to cultivate wisdom. Sometimes, particularly in the Western world, people think that you can get to enlightenment by yourself. They think that because the Buddha did it, you can do it too. Just follow what the Buddha did, right? But if you could really get to enlightenment by yourself, the Buddha would just have said, hey, everybody, I got to enlightenment. I'm going back to the royal palace. You guys are on your own. Figure it out. Right? If you could truly get to enlightenment by yourself, there would be no need for him to teach, right? But of course, that's not true. And what he teaches is that you actually need a teacher. It's only a Buddha that would be able to get to enlightenment by themselves, and that's very rare to happen in the world. So here he's explaining the step by step, and we've examined this previously in the previous volume 2, where I walked you through step by step and I showed you what the Buddha was teaching you here. Essentially, he's talking about having confidence in a teacher and visiting that person, paying respect to that person, because that person's not there because they want anything from you or they expect anything from you. So it's wise to pay respect to this person who's interested in seeing you be well, and they're investing this time, effort, energy, and resources into helping you to be able to get to enlightenment. So it's wise to pay respect to that person. Then as you pay respect, that you give ear, meaning you listen with eager ears to the teachings. Having heard the teachings, you then memorize those. There are certain teachings you're going to need to memorize, like the Eightfold Path, the 5 precepts. You're going to need to know those really deeply and things like this. Then you examine those teachings, right? You examine the meaning of them. Then you start reflecting on these teachings. You start gaining this introspection and kind of looking at the teachings. And as you do, you start seeing how they're true. So there's this enthusiasm that springs up in the mind, like, oh my goodness, this is all true. What the Buddha said and what he's teaching, this is all true. Now you apply your will. You start putting your will into practicing and further investigation of the teachings. And now you strive to practice these teachings in your day-to-day life, because it's going to take effort to bring these teachings into your life. You're not going to just happen to be able to get to enlightenment. You're not just going to stumble into enlightenment. You're going to need to strive. And there's going to be some cases where it's a little bit of a struggle and difficult. But this is the last struggle of all struggles. You can gradually work towards this improvement by striving. And then as you strive purposefully, you realize the truth. You get to this wisdom. And by seeing this wisdom, that's what's actually going to liberate your mind. So the Buddha is teaching you these different things here that are all helpful to be able to make your way to enlightenment. That final knowledge, or that wisdom, that enlightened mental state, it's achieved by gradual training. So remind yourself of this whenever you're putting pressure on yourself to be perfect today. Understand that it's not about being perfect today. It's about whatever you're doing today. Gradually make your way towards enlightenment. And as you're having missteps, just figure out what is the wisdom that you're lacking. Cultivate that wisdom through this gradual training, gradual practice, and now you'll experience gradual progress. And over a consistent long-term period, you'll gradually make your way to enlightenment. So any questions here that you guys would like to ask, you can put those into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So what I'm going to do is just thank all of you guys for joining. I appreciate you for reading. I appreciate your interest in learning and practicing these teachings. As you guys have questions, you're always more than welcome to reach out. You guys know that you can ask questions in classes. You can post on our Facebook group. You can send private messages, or you can schedule personal guidance, either in person or online, and we can meet and we can talk, and I'll help you to be able to understand the teachings. So as you need help, feel free to reach out. Tomorrow in our group learning program, we're going to be in the second section of the Eightfold Path. I'm going to be teaching the moral conduct section, so you guys are always welcome to that. Then on Monday, I'm going to be starting a Foundation in the Path to Enlightenment course. That's the 5-day course from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. that I teach at the temple every month. Then on Wednesday, we're going to be doing the breathing mindfulness meditation. It's the third part of a 4-part series that I'm doing. So you guys are always welcome to any and all of these classes. And we even have the tour on Friday going to the Buddhist temples here in Chiang Mai. So you're welcome to attend any of these that you like. So again, thank you all for reading. Thank you for your diligent studying. Thank you for your questions. And I'm here for you as you guys need help. Take care and have a really wonderful and lovely rest of your day. We'll see you next time. Sawadee ka.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To provide support for this podcast, visit patreon.com/supportbuddha. To access more teachings, visit buddhadailywisdom.com. There, you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Remember to establish a daily, consistent meditation practice, along with learning and practicing these teachings. A well-developed meditation practice is the foundation in which to train the mind to attain enlightenment.